In Luke's Gospel, we can note some themes which are important. In the Gospel, we see that Luke presented God as having concern for those who are without a voice, those who are marginalized. So Luke presents God as imminent. So there are two words we can compare. God who is transcendent is God who is high and removed. God who is imminent is God who is near us, God who is among us. We could also recall a similar word, a synonym, which is Emmanuel, God with us. So in Luke's gospel, we see God as dwelling with God's people, God who is God of the poor. God is championing the cause of the marginalized and the oppressed. So Luke tends to give special attention to, say, marginalized groups like women. So in that society, in that culture of the day, it was a patriarchal society. In a patriarchal society, male dominant society, men boss. So the women were silent. So Luke paid special interest in the women. And we see that especially in chapter 1, which presents an introduction to the book. We see the case with Elizabeth, who was marginalized, who was silenced. She said that God look on her with favor and remove her disgrace from among people. That's Luke chapter 1 and verse 25. This, in a similar way, Mary the Magnificat, in Luke chapter 1, Mary praised God, for God has taken notice of her lowly estate. So Luke presents God as a God of the poor, God who is liberating the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed. We also see in Luke that Luke structured the gospel in such a way as that the gospel started in Jerusalem and it also ended in Jerusalem. So it started in Jerusalem in chapter 1, where we see the ministry in the temple by Zechariah, and it ended in Jerusalem. Remember, they were told to tarry and wait a while in Jerusalem until they are empowered by the Holy Spirit. So start in Jerusalem, ended in Jerusalem. We will see similarly in Acts that Luke tend to favor the temple. Maybe it is that Luke is saying that salvation comes from Jerusalem, salvation comes from the temple. So in Old Testament theology, that the temple is symbolic of the presence of God. Remember how even when the people were in exile, they said, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? For them is that God, the presence of God is in the temple. In the temple, in the most holy place where Zechariah was ministering in chapter 1, you have the most holy place. That's where the ark of the presence of God is, the ark of the covenant, and that is symbolic of the presence of God. So Jerusalem was very important in the whole work of the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah. So Luke was very careful in presenting Jerusalem, fulfilling prophecy that the Messiah was born in the city of David. So these are some themes which are significant in the gospel according to Luke. Finally, Luke could be seen as one who paid special attention to the ministry and the work of the Holy Spirit. So, for example, in chapter 1, we see the creation and the providence of God, as in the sovereignty of God, the superintendent work of the Holy Spirit. So it is the Holy Spirit that is doing the work. It's the Holy Spirit that is who is the enabler. The Holy Spirit is the reality in chapter 1, the one who is moving about. So Luke had a special interest in the work of the Holy Spirit. Similarly, we see that in Acts as well, as we know that Luke is also the writer of Acts of the Apostles. So in Acts, you could even name Acts as Acts of the Holy Spirit, as we see the Holy Spirit was at work carrying out the foundation work of the church, moving the mission. As we see in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, that the gospel will be preached in Jerusalem, in Samaria, and in the uttermost part of the world. So this is the mission, the gospel statement, the missional statement, where the gospel is being moved by the Spirit to go to all corners of the world. So these are some just few. I mean, of course, the list that I mentioned is not exhaustive, but these are just some examples of themes which we can look out for in the gospel according to Luke.